Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com.
Welcome, everyone, to the Community IT podcast. My name is Carolyn Woodard, and I'm the Outreach Director for Community IT. And today I'm really excited to be talking with our cybersecurity expert, Matt, who is going to tell us more about the recent outages and how you can be more prepared. Matt, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Carolyn. My name is Matthew Eshleman, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Community IT. And in my role here, I have two primary responsibilities. So one is to manage all of our back-end systems and cybersecurity platforms that we use to keep our clients secure. And then I also work on a kind of client-by-client basis, working on technology and cybersecurity strategy. So really looking forward to the conversation today.
So I thought, I heard that Crowdstrike didn't really impact a lot of our clients.
Yes, that's correct.
Yay. So I thought maybe you could give us what to do in case of, like, have your plan in place, but then what's the typical, what should you do first? How do you respond when you find out that there's some kind of issue going on and it does impact you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do think disaster recovery and disaster response has really evolved quite a lot from, I think, whenever we were originally developing these plans, back in the day when there was a server, in the closet down the hall. And so the disaster response is really focused on, how do we recover this server
back into your building,
our building, or how we're going to, restore things that we're in charge of, or we have the ability to respond to. I think now a lot of the disaster recovery or exposure to kind of risk and downtime has really been outsourced as part of the migration to the cloud. And so now, a lot of the kind of incident response is a data breach at a vendor that you may use, or in the case of CrowdStrike, a bad update gets pushed from a product that you rely on to provide security or remote support or whatever it happens to be. And so with the transition to the cloud, we've gotten a lot of benefits, but I think we've also outsourced a lot of the risk and then associated response time, because if CrowdStrike hadn't been so quick to identify and fix that issue, it could have been a lot worse than it actually turned out to be. And so CrowdStrike specifically, that's not the endpoint security tool that we use as our main endpoint platform. We have a number of clients who get it, who pay for it, or who receive it as a donation. I think CrowdStrike is very focused on providing security to NGOs and policy groups specifically. And of those clients that had it, it was maybe 10% of the endpoints were impacted. So frustrating to be sure, but not, completely debilitating. But again, for those organizations that were impacted, it really was a chance to, unfortunately test out their disaster recovery plan in terms of how they're responding and fixing endpoints. I think for a lot of organizations, particularly small to mid-size, that we're working with, they're using the cloud a lot. I think the big headache was really on the BitLocker and decrypting the hard drive so that you could get in and make that fix, delete the offending file. So for organizations that are cloud centric and those keys are stored in the cloud, like that was relatively easy to get to. I know for larger enterprises that maybe had the keys stored on servers that were also impacted, that was a real challenge, right? That the recovery environment was also impacted, or the ability to recover endpoints was also impacted. And so, I think whenever there's any of these big kind of high profile outages or issues, it is a good opportunity for organizations to use that, even if you weren't impacted, just to review your own disaster recovery plan and say, well, if we were impacted, or if this software tool is impacted, how would that have, how would we have responded? And I think it can be a good exercise to identify gaps in that coverage.
How often do you recommend that an organization should review their disaster recovery plan or their kind of response plan? Is that something you do once a year?
Yeah, I think, once a year is probably sufficient. I think probably more helpful is making sure that you can carve out time to have that debrief and lessons learned after something happened. So again, when it's really top of mind, right, like right now, it's a good time to just talk through it, because I think the pain is fresh, or at least watching other people go through it is helpful. Um, I think that's something at Community IT that we did, not related to CrowdStrike, but previously, whenever a managed services provider tool was impacted, and so that caused us to make some changes in terms of how we design our system to build in some more resiliency, and so that we don't have all of our eggs in one basket, so to speak. Um, so I think having that time to talk about adjusting and reviewing an organization's business continuity or disaster recovery plan is a good thing to do in the heels of an accident, because there's lots of focus and attention on it, and I think it can be a time where you can actually get that attention internally to have those conversations.
And who should be on that team, like ideally? Is that something that the IT department or whoever's in charge of IT will go to the executive team? Is it something that maybe you have a committee where there's someone from the executive team and someone from IT and maybe some other stakeholders on a committee? What's a good best practice for putting that disaster recovery plan together and reviewing it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it's a good question. Every organization is going to be a little bit different. I think for big scenarios like this, right, this goes maybe beyond what we would typically call, backup and disaster recovery, which I think of as mostly, getting data back after kind of a single system failure into business continuity, which is how do we continue to operate in the face of, some bigger event, pandemic, major platform outage, that kind of thing. So, that differentiation aside, uh, I think having, IT kind of owns the operational aspects of it. I think for many organizations, the, finance is really, the chief financial officer is the person who kind of owns business continuity for the organization. And so that's kind of where I would say most organizations would be. I think it is important to have potentially some board level insight. And this kind of intersects a little bit, with organizations that are able to do some tabletop exercises to kind of test out their business continuity plan in the face of a cyber attack or some other thing. And I think those conversations really can help illuminate gaps that may exist in the plan, because you have a really broad and executive perspective on the operations of the organization. And so things that IT may not think about get surfaced in those conversations with more senior executives in the organization. So, I think certainly IT owning the operational aspect, but then getting input from typically, kind of the chief financial or operational executives in the company, and maybe extending up into the board. I mean, the board is really a good place to initiate those conversations and to make sure that they're happening. And then I think a lot of the work ends up getting carried out by the finance and operations executives in the organizations that we're working with, which is going to be small to mid-sized nonprofit organizations from 30 to 500 staff. That's probably a reasonable size to have those parameters.
I love your suggestion to kind of game out different scenarios. This just reminded me yesterday, I was reading a thread on care for employees who have had a death in the family and being able to give an employee like a month off to be able to, handle everything that you have to do when that sort of thing happens. And what if that were your IT director? Who's not
Mm-hmm.
there when something like this happens. So how would you cover for that? How do you have redundancy? Who do you call next? Like, do you have a phone tree, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
everyone scrambling for, what the next step is? Do you even have people's phone numbers somewhere that you can call them, if they were on your laptop and you can't get into your laptop, for example?
Yeah. I think, and those tabletop exercises are good because it does illuminate, maybe some gaps in the process. We went through a tabletop exercise with one of our clients, and it was interesting in that going through that process, the answer to many questions like, oh, this person does it, this person does it, this person does it. And it's always the same person who's really bearing a lot of the responsibility for their incident response plan. And so then the question is like, okay, what happens if this person is out, sick, unavailable, they're on vacation, unreachable? If you've got, your whole business continuity plan is dependent on, one key person in the organization and they're not available for some reason, then, that can be a real challenge. Now, again, maybe it's not practical to, build in super redundancies for all these areas, but I think it's also a good idea to say it, have another backup layer in place and understand it's not maybe going to be ideal, but yes, if the primary person who's responsible for running all of this is unavailable, here's where we go next, and make that person aware or make that company aware that they're going to be responsible for those activities.
Yeah, I love that. Can you maybe walk us through some of the steps and in what order you would go through to make your recovery plan? So we've talked a little bit about the first thing is you should have a plan and the people that should be involved in kind of gaming out what that plan is going to look like. And then what are the things that you do? What should be in the plan? Like, what do you do first? What do you do next? What do you do after that?
So I think it really starts with having a good understanding of the systems that you have and the priority and importance of those systems, and make sure that that's something that is agreed upon, broadly. So IT may have one perspective on what system is the most important. Executive leadership may have a different perspective on the most important system and the priority. And so I think having a great understanding of the systems that you need to have access to do your work and how you're going to go about responding to them is important, because you are going to need to make choices in terms of where you're focusing resources. You can't fix everything all at once. And so having a pretty good sense of, system A is our most critical because that's how we, pay our bills or receive funding. And so even though that only impacts, maybe 5 people or 10 people, that is the most business critical application. And we need to focus on getting that up first. That's important to have, is that playbook and the list of systems that you are going to respond to and the order in which you're going to do it. So I think that's really, once you agree that, hey, we need to have a business continuity plan, making sure that the priority order is clear, and you have a good understanding of what it means and what systems that is connected to, so that you can restore that first, is a good process to go through, and something that requires, IT can't just decide that on their own. I think that's really the benefit of having those conversations at the higher organizational level, because the priorities of IT might be different than, the finance department or the program staff. And so having a place where those conversations can be had, you can have a consensus on what we're going to focus on first. That would be kind of the next place to start, or the next place to go.
Great. So yeah, kind of making those decisions ahead of time. Like, we're going to get payroll up first, and then everybody can have their email abilities back or something like that. Like, just making hard choices. Yeah. And then do you have any advice on, so everything goes well, you follow your plan, there's some little glitches because you didn't anticipate something or the other, but then you're back. What do you do? How do you know that everything is back the way it's supposed to be, or better, hopefully? And what do you do after you've recovered? Are there some best practices for that?
Yeah, I think those are really good questions. I think, how do you know you're back? I think, confirming that, the systems are up, that you are able to confirm, that the configurations are the same as what you had before. And so I think, again, the importance of good documentation and making sure that, maybe some shortcuts that were taken to get systems back up. Maybe you had to give more permissions to a certain user or group. I think after the dust is settled and you're, operating for a little bit, it is an important process to kind of go back and make sure that all the steps that were taken to restore a system back into functional status. You undo maybe some shortcuts or maybe non-best practices that were required there. And then I think, as we've been discussing, just having that formal process to go and have the incident report, review what went well, what needs to be changed, what gaps existed, so that you are able to take those lessons learned and improve the plan. I think those business continuity plans are not static documents that just kind of sit on a shelf, but they need to be updated and revised pretty regularly. And again, this is a good time to go back and make those edits so that you're better prepared for when the inevitable next different outage is going to impact the organization.
Yeah, we're all vulnerable to just sometimes just random things. This company had the bad update, and then it just cascaded through all these different industries. Well, that all sounds great. I wanted to say, we just did a webinar on being a learning organization, and one of the suggestions in that webinar was to be the kind of an organization where you have like a post-mortem, talk about what happened, learn the lessons. Like, I needed to have this person's phone number so that I could call them quickly when something happened. Those sorts of lessons. I think it's good to be an organization that makes time for that and sits down and talks about it. Yes,
100% agree.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Matt. I really appreciate it. And you always have so much wisdom and information about cybersecurity systems. So thank you for helping us understand more.
Great. Thanks, Carolyn. I appreciate being able to get to talk about this.
Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.